It's October of last year. I was in the receiving hall of Lamezia Terme Airport, and I just lugged off 4 huge bags from one of 2 baggage claims just minutes before. I'm standing in this receiving hall, and it hits me like one big pit in my stomach that I still don't have an Italian SIM card, and I have no way of contacting my professor who is supposed to pick me up in the next 10 minutes. I'm usually a really type A person, usually very organized, so this is something really strange for me to do. But I immediately went into problem-solving mode. I opened my purse, found a couple euros, walked over to the nearest phone booth, and punched in the 10 digits. It rang for a couple seconds, and then she picked up, thankfully. But she couldn't hear me on the other end. So basically, after a few moments, she said, "Tanvi, this is you. I should be at the airport in the next 15 minutes. Please wait for me outside." So huge sigh of relief. Was really grateful that whatever contingency plan worked. I stepped outside, and so began my journey from a middle-sized city in California to a really small town called Rende in Calabria, Italy. Okay, so I had to visualize when I got here where I am. So the way I explain it to Americans back home is Calabria is the toe of Italy. I'm kind of in that little arch spot, and I work at Università della Calabria. So that's kind of where I'm at, and it helps them visualize where I am. But when I got there, I got 2 really fast questions from everyone that I met. It was, who are you, and what are you doing in Calabria? Okay, which I'm pretty sure everyone here is thinking as well. So here's my basic answer. I also was a dancer back home for 15 years. I know what it's like to repeat a motion or a phrase over and over again until it becomes muscle memory. So here's my muscle memory answer. So I'm a first-generation Indian American. I recently graduated from Stanford University in human biology, and I'm here in Italy to study gender-based violence in Calabria on a Fulbright scholarship. Okay, so my Fulbright scholarship really is a research project for 9 months where I get to kind of research whatever topic is really interesting to me. And when I was back in California, one of the issues that I cared greatly about was gender-based violence, and I wanted to look at gender-based violence in Calabria from a systems perspective, okay? So my research really is a mixed methods analysis. It's both qualitative and quantitative. It consists of interviews, focus groups with a really wide range of people, from staff of anti-violence centers in the region, founders of these centers, psychologists, lawyers, and academicians back at the university. And it's multidimensional, and I hope that it goes in-depth enough, but also is a broad enough look at this region where data on this issue really is lacking. But I got to Calabria, and within the first few weeks, I realized really quickly that for the first time in my 22 years, I really had no one watching me. I had no one to be accountable to. When you're in public school until, throughout high school, you're living with your parents. You go to school, you report to your teachers, you come back home, you report to your parents. And then you're in college and you're reporting to your peers, your roommates, your professors, you're submitting assignments, but there's always someone in society that's looking at you and kind of seeing what your actions are and what the consequences are, right? But for the first time on this scholarship, I had realized that no one was really watching me. So who am I really? Who am I when nobody's watching? Okay, so here's my first answer for you that I realized. I realized, hey, one thing that's been consistent in my life is that I'm a linguophile. I'm a lover of languages. So imagine 7-year-old me going to school in a suburb in California, elementary school. Everything's in English. I'm learning in English. I'm playing with my friends in English. I come back home, and my parents are speaking in Tamil, which is the mother tongue of our state back in India. But they're also speaking in Hindi, and Hindi's on the television in the background. And I go back to school the next day, and I'm taking elective Spanish. So here I am in this constant mix of languages. And I realized early on that I love the idea and also the action of taking words in different tongues, different syllables, different phrases, and being able to communicate with people just across borders, communities of people that, I wouldn't have been able to communicate with before. And when it comes to gender-based violence, this is a skill that has been integral to my research. because I'm able to converse with people on a very intimate level and gain their trust and gain their narratives for my research and for the betterment of this issue, because I can speak the language. And so I studied Italian, by the way, like in college for a couple of years, but I realized really quickly when I was in Calabria that putting this language into practice was much harder than I expected, especially compared to the dialect that's there and the accent, but it's just been an amazing journey and something that I'm really grateful for, and it's pushed me to understand and learn this language to a whole nother level. So that's what this Fulbright has been about. It's been about giving me the power to make the most out of these 9 months in the way that I want to. So when no one's watching me, I got involved in the local community college and teaching English. I got involved by going to, protest events like in the city. And it's like these things that have really shaped my experience and have shaped my research. But now I want to get to intimate partner violence. Why is intimate partner violence relevant to Italy? Why is it relevant to Calabria? Well, here's one statistic. 31.5% of women in Italy aged 16 to 70 years old have experienced physical or sexual violence in their lifetime. Okay, 31.5%. That means in this room, a little over 3 out of 10 women who are in this age gap have probably experienced physical and sexual violence in their lifetime. That is a really distressing number to me and something that should not even be the case. But if we dive a little bit deeper, when Italians were asked what is the cause of this, 74% cited unemployment. So finances and the economy apparently plays a role, according to Italians. But 49%, so almost 50%, almost half of Italians say that media causes violence, okay? So I want you guys to keep that in your mind as I continue through my talk. Diving deeper into Calabria specifically, there is not any formal studies that's been done on this issue in the past, so my study is kind of the first of its kind, but in an informal study done in 2012 by the Foundation of Ethics in Calabria, 87% of perpetrators were found to be current or former partners. So I want you to think about that. This violence is not random. This violence is not happening, just like one-off. All of a sudden, you see like a big news story on the news. This violence is happening in your homes, by people in your community, by people in your social circles, and it's happening behind closed doors. So it's a huge issue that we need to kind of break the silence about. So I've distilled my research. It's still continuing. I've distilled it into 4 pretty easy points, okay? So point 1 is internal and external dysfunction within the anti-violence center system. So when you look back and think back to that map that I had up there, in the entire region of Calabria, there are 8 to 12 anti-violence centers that are established. I say 8 to 12 because some of them are not considered legitimate centers by others, but I would say 8 to 12 is the ballpark. And internally, these anti-violence centers are having many issues and inconsistencies because funding is a problem. They're having a problem retaining staff. They're having a problem, creating the events and the outreach that they would need, and creating all the resources for support for survivors of violence that come to them in a consistent manner because they're lacking funding. But the external dysfunction is even more interesting. Out of these 8 to 12 centers in the region, I've kind of categorized them into 3 different ones. One, which is, feminist, rooted in the theory of the 70s, very established centers that have been around for, decades. And then there are centers that are religiously motivated. And then there are centers that are much newer and have popped up in the last couple of years. But the thing is, these centers don't really talk to each other. There's this idea of my methodology is the correct one, so why collaborate? Why connect? And that really poses an issue for the entire system as a whole, because without that integration, without that consistency and connection, the underlying goal is survivors are not having the support that they really should be. The second point that I think is really interesting, and I was a pre-medical student back at home, so health is a lens that I pretty much utilize in all of my work, is that health is not a priority for survivors. When talking to survivors, when talking to staff, founders, anyone that I've interviewed, the priorities for survivors of violence go job security, security for my children, economic independence, and that's kind of it. But the physical consequences, the mental health consequences of violence, like chronic health issues, spine issues, dental issues, post-traumatic stress disorder, depression. These are all things that are, found in the literature consistently as being consequences of violence, and they're found throughout the lifetime. But these issues are not being addressed. They're not being addressed by survivors, and they're not being addressed by the system. And third, and pretty tragic, there's community pressure not to report and not seek help. So what does this mean? This means that the survivor who's coming out of an extremely traumatic, abusive environment, already feeling a lot of shame, a lot of uncertainty, when they go to their nearest social circle, whether that's their family or their friends, even if it's a policeman or a lawyer, they're consistently told by these people that they shouldn't report to maintain kind of homeostasis. Keep your issues behind closed doors. Maintain your sense of family. That's the most important thing. And that's really tragic, and that's something that we as a community can really change. But when I asked all of my stakeholders, kind of what are the next steps? What can we do to make sure that gender-based violence, intimate partner violence is not an issue in this region? They said across the board, preventative education. So of course, when you think preventative education, you think, education in schools. Let's talk to our kids. Let's talk to kids from when they are really young, 6 years old, 7 years old, in a consistent manner about what is communication, what is respect, what is healthy sexuality, what are actions that we are allowed, in society, and what are things that are really not allowed, and how do you recognize these, problematic behaviors? That's extremely important, and that is, in all of the literature, kind of the next step to building the next better generation. But I would say that this media issue is something that we can act on right now. This is a headline from a couple weeks ago. Woman groped on Italian TV in prank despite repeatedly telling man to stop. Okay, I'm pretty sure some of you may have seen this in the news. Basically, this woman was in the singing show and she was groped by a dancer on stage, and the audience was laughing, the judges were laughing, and later on when she denounced it, people just said, hey, it's a joke, you should laugh it off. And that's problematic because when we're in a society that sees violence on such public platforms and we say nothing about it, we do nothing about it, we become desensitized to that violence and we allow it to perpetuate for generations to come. I think this is an issue that we can, as Calabrians, as Italians, as people in the world, I think we can do something about. Band together with your friends, band together with your family. If you see something that's going wrong on TV, on a show you're watching, a video on YouTube, report it. Do something about it. Say something about it. Don't allow it to just pass you by, because that's what perpetuates this culture that allows violence to happen behind closed doors. So finally, I want to ask you guys, at the end of this session, even think about it when you go home, who are you when nobody's watching? When no one's holding you accountable for anything, what are your morals? What are your ethics? What type of society do you want to create? Thank you.